When a heat wave hits the UK, we often talk about the urgent need for climate action and how governments aren't doing enough. That, of course, remains true. But I thought I'd focus on a more positive side of sunny days today, which is that solar power is absolutely booming. Globally, the amount of energy produced by solar increased by 30% last year, 30% in 1 year. That's incredible. And this is not an outlier for the technology. So the amount of electricity generated by solar has jumped on average 27% every year for a full decade. Solar power has now overtaken wind and nuclear, or almost nuclear, it's now sort of matching in terms of energy generation. And this increase was enough to meet the entire growth of electricity demand, meaning for the first time outside of global recessions, fossil fuel use for electricity production fell. It's fantastic. Now, of course, if you are a regular viewer of this show, you won't be surprised to learn this transition is mainly being driven in one country, China. This chart shows how much solar capacity has been added to the global grid each year since 2022. As you can see, it's going up every year. The dark green shows solar capacity added in China. The light green shows solar capacity added everywhere else. Now, as you can see, for the past 3 years, the dark green block fills up most of the bar. So China has installed more solar capacity in each of the past 3 years than the rest of the world combined, which is incredible. Very, very important. Before you say, but China is also burning loads of coal. Yes, they are, but they're moving in the right direction. So China's exponential growth over the past 4 decades was powered by coal and other fossil fuels. This line shows that rise continuing in the last 10 years. However, since 2023, so you see it's constantly going up, so they were using more and more fossil fuels over this period of time. Since 2023, for the first time ever, the amount of electricity generated by fossil fuels in China has flatlined. So China's carbon emissions have peaked. Still very high, but they've peaked. And this is the key bit. That's not because China's energy production has stopped growing. That's still going up. So you want that, especially if you've still got a lot of poor people. You want your energy to grow. You want more electricity. But what's happening in China is that extra electricity is coming from solar. And that's a story that now applies on a global level. So this chart shows the cumulative change in electricity demand globally from the year 2000. As you can see, it's always going up fairly linearly, actually. It's a sort of a straight line. That's good. We want more people to have access to electricity. That's a major sign of development. Great. Line goes up is good. However, until 2024, more electricity meant more fossil fuel use. But, and this is the good news, for the first time last year, all the extra demand was met by renewables, mostly wind and solar. So then the amount of electricity used still going up, but the amount of fossil fuels used to create electricity is now level. Of course, another problem you might have now, none of this solves solar's big problem, which is intermittency. So solar might be good as part of an energy system with nuclear, gas or coal as its base load, so it's backup. You need that in case the sun isn't shining, for example, at night. So often in energy systems at the moment, solar will sort of put money into the grid in the day, and then at night it will be a gas turbine that powers the electricity grid, which is a big problem for solar. However, there's also good news on that front. So the Financial Times has run an article on the dawn of 24/7 solar power. They say this dawn has been driven by falling battery costs. The article cites Bloomberg research showing the cost of utility-scale batteries has more than halved since 2022. That's in 3 years, it has halved. That's incredible. With 24-hour solar plants now being built in Abu Dhabi, Australia, and even India. These are countries with lots of sun. The caveat is that if the sun doesn't come out for like a few days, then you will need more batteries than is plausible. So we probably, in a country like our own, we will still need a different source of baseload power. But the big problem with solar was always batteries being quite expensive. Batteries are now cheap. Banseka, can people enjoy the sun this weekend without feeling a nagging sense of impending doom?
I think so. I think this is a good story, I think, isn't it? There's a lot of doom and gloom, obviously, that often accompanies sort of climate change stories, which from a behavioural change perspective can make people just shut off, can't they? But this is a good news story. I was quite happy to read it when I saw the script today. I think it's interesting to see that some of these key technologies are now going to become perhaps more economically competitive. So there's a kind of good economic argument for that. well. Decarbonisation is not something kind of hypothetical. It's something that, that is possible. And perhaps it's a sign that the energy system is beginning to change in some aspects structurally. Don't want to be complacent about that, because of course there are lots of vested interests in keeping things exactly the way that they are. There's lots of vested interests, of course, still in fossil fuels and oil and all of that stuff as well. But it's good to see that economically some of these things actually are quite viable. The China example is really interesting as well, isn't it? China contains multitudes. On the one hand, it's still emitting a lot, but it's also leading the charge for green energy, which is really interesting. Strikes me that that's a talking point really for stronger industrial policy. I'm assuming that's how they've done it, right? The ability to be able to do that really large scale, long-term planning that I said I was envious of earlier in the in the previous section. Green technology is part of that China dream, I guess, right? Which is really interesting. So, things like coordinated investment, subsidized production, accepting sort of perhaps lower short-term profitability for longer-term profitability in the long run once this becomes more and more profitable, is really exciting. And, for energy to be treated, I suppose, energy transition, to be treated as a national strategic priority, which it looks like the Chinese government is doing, the CCP is doing, is very exciting. It's a bit of a, what would you call it? They're sort of leading the way in that respect, despite the negative things that we often hear about China being the worst emitter. They are leading a pathway perhaps for something a bit different. Whether we can do that here, there's many different things. The way the Chinese economy works, you know that better than me, of course, having been there yourself recently.
I'm an expert. I've been there for 2 weeks.
Well, you had a good chat with Jostein Hager and people like that as well, haven't you? And so I'm sure there's huge structural differences between the way their economy works and ours. I don't know if you've got any ideas about to what extent we can actually learn from in terms of green technology and implementing it here.
It's worse. Our emissions are now lower than China. Yeah. So we have done quite well. Like, we have halved our emissions. So
is that like per? How is that measured, by the way? Like because obviously we're a much smaller
per capita. So our emissions have halved per capita. China's have just leveled off. But obviously the example that China gives to the world is one that you can have extraordinarily fast development while using an expanding number of renewables. Because obviously, it's difficult for like a sub-Saharan African country or India to sort of take inspiration from Britain, because we already developed, and actually now we're stagnating. So there's an argument that, our route to carbon neutrality hasn't been very attractive for other countries to follow, because electricity did get more expensive and we're actually using less electricity every year. Whereas China is showing that you can have super fast development, you can have a consistent increase in the quality of life, all while going green. So I think there probably are more, even though we've done a decent job at reducing carbon emissions, like halving them in 20 years, not too shabby. I think there's probably fewer countries looking at Britain and saying, I want to be like Britain. And there are lots of countries looking at China and thinking, I want to be like China. Also, obviously, we don't export really cheap solar panels to the rest of the world, and China does. So there is a big sense in which China is enabling the green transition just in a way more significant way than anyone else in the world.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel like, even though we've done a good job with some aspects of the emission stuff, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it's a part of our economy. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know what our economy is in many ways.
Well, we mainly have a services-based economy, so we don't produce very much.
No.
But I mean, on the industrial side, I mean, I presume the green stuff is, I mean, the government is constantly talking about like green industrial policy. Our wind turbine factory closed. So yeah, maybe we don't make that much.
No.
We just stopped using coal.
That's the next step, I think.
And now I think a majority of our energy comes from renewables most of the time. So that's fine. Go sunbathe, feel good, wear suntan lotion, skin cancer. Actually, a depressing story we could have chosen today is skin cancer rates are going up.
Oh no.
But I thought I'd go for solar power instead of that. You can set the mood by doing the news, and I chose solar panel instead of skin cancer. I hope you appreciate that.